you, Dr. Dent, for being here today. I'm sure that all of us who had cancer and lymphedema, as well as the lymphedema therapists, are grateful for your renewed interest in the lymphatic system.
Well, it's a pleasure being here, Joanne, and I appreciate the privilege. As you know, as a naturopathic doctor, I appreciate also the importance and vital necessity of a properly functioning lymphatic system. Unfortunately, the truth of the lymphatic system is still not well understood and certainly not well represented in medical education. Very few people know much about it, even though it's responsible for regulating so many functions of the body, including water balance, the electrolyte protein balance, tissue hydration, and organ health. And even though it is such an elegant and sophisticated system, there still remains a lot to be learned about managing it and the ramifications of poor lymphatic health. Every person who suffers from lymphedema should certainly appreciate the fact that the ramifications of the lymphatic system extend well beyond a swollen limb.
Thanks, Dr. Dent. But before we get into the specifics of lymphedema, I want to explain why your observations and participation in my practice as a lymphedema therapist have been so valuable. Over the years, I've had several patients referred to me who had been diagnosed with lymphedema. And when they came to me, in fact, it wasn't lymphedema at all. It was something underlying condition that was much more serious than lymphedema that could only be diagnosed by a doctor.
There are several such conditions that need to be looked out for. Every practitioner in terms of lymphatic massage needs to be aware of the fact that under certain circumstances, patients with compromised cardiovascular health, particularly congestive heart failure, are not candidates for lymphatic massage. Sometimes by relocating or redistributing all that liquid burden, you can actually overburden the heart or overstress the heart in patients who are having congestive heart failure issues. Also things like deep vein thrombosis, thrombophlebitis, things of this nature are definitely contraindicated in terms of lymphatic massage therapy. Also ascites that may accompany pancreatic disease, liver malignancies, other forms of malignancies, the accumulation of intra-abdominal quantities of water, which also may lead to a secondary peripheral edema or dependent edema. These are not necessarily appropriately treated with lymphatic massage, as it may actually overburden the liver itself or the internal system, so to speak, damaging protein balance and putting an unnecessary and dangerous stress on the cardiovascular system.
And you know, we learn as therapists that these are absolute indications, but I'm still surprised when I see somebody come in that's been referred to me that has an absolute contraindication and they want me to do manual lymph drainage. And my clinic was right across from a hospital, and that came in handy, particularly when I recognized that I was getting in way over my head and I could at least send them across the street. I don't have that clinic anymore, but I have you in my office, and I'm very grateful. Thank you. So let's discuss some of the factors that play a role in lymphatic health and are so important to the successful management of lymphedema. So perhaps we should start with nutrition and identify those foods that should be eliminated from our diet. You are what we eat, is what our parents used to tell us. But now that we better understand digestion, we tell our children as well as our patients, you are what you eat, digest, and absorb.
I think that's very true. And of course, the foods we want to avoid are foods that are inherently unhealthy. These guidelines and ideas are becoming better developed as the years go by. They extend in terms of sophistication far beyond basic food groupings. That may have been expedient in emergency scenarios of World War II or whenever these things actually emerged, but now we have a much more sophisticated and complete view of how the body handles food. Many foods which are pro-inflammatory or just non-tolerated or poorly tolerated by an individual need to definitely be avoided. Inflammation is one of the major factors in controlling lymphedema and in fact enhancing general lymphatic function and physiology. And so eating foods that are, again, as I say, allergenic, pro-inflammatory, or that contribute very little, if any, nutritional value to the diet. These things burden the systems, draw on resources of the body, and add to the difficulties that the already burdened lymphatic system has in regulating body fluid balance, immunity, and generally protein balance also in the interstitial spaces of the tissues.
Well, you know, Dr. Dan, one of the things that I discovered, which was really important to my diet, was I discovered the value of enzymes. I didn't even know what they were, and now we're finally starting to see books in it. But I still see patients who come in and they have no idea why they should take an enzyme along with their meals, and yet they're overcooking their foods and there's nothing left that it can be absorbed. Can you just kind of touch on enzymes and what their importance are?
Enzyme physiology and the utilization in diet is again another area of poorly understood practice. Medicine has just recently developed ideas and understandings of the usefulness and necessity of enzymes in digestive health, as well as in modulating inflammatory and in immune activity of the body. Enzymes are in many cases very beneficial in enhancing the general digestion of the foods we eat, thereby reducing inflammatory allergic potentiation by cutting down or digesting, breaking down these complex molecules so that the body can effectively handle them and, as you pointed out earlier, assimilate them, which is the all-important step in digestion, assimilating those nutrients in an efficient fashion so that they can then be distributed to the needing tissues.
It gets back to what we can digest and absorb.
Correct.
Is critical. And the other thing that was, well, I wasn't happy to learn this, but as a cancer survivor, I realized how important it was. And that was the importance of eliminating sugar in my diet. And I know you're adamant about this, and maybe an explanation of why sugar can be so damaging for those who are struggling with cancer, and sometimes even other chronic diseases. Sugar can be the culprit.
I've found in many instances through the last 36 years exacerbation or worsening of clinical manifestations of various diseases, particularly those associated with inflammatory disorders. Some people are extremely sensitive to the ingestion of sugar, and you can monitor the level of suffering, so to speak, they have in direct correlation with the amount of sugar that they've taken or have eaten. It's generally wise to avoid it. It tends to have a deleterious effect on the immune system, suppressing effect. When the immune system is unbalanced, you can have problems that way too, to where you actually increase inflammatory activity, tissue irritation, tissue destruction, as well as lowering resistance to disease. When it comes to fighting things like malignancy, you want to have every system maximized. You want the immune system functioning properly. You want inflammatory parameters within normal range. And so nutritionally bankrupt foods are not appropriate.
But isn't it true, Dr. Dent, that the cancer actually lives off the sugar? That we're actually feeding it every time we eat sugar?
There is research that I believe indicates that to be the case, and there are some very innovative therapies that are attempting to capitalize on that fact by reducing the amount of available glucose to cancer cells in an effort to weaken them and perhaps even make them more amenable to chemotherapeutic attack.
Okay. So I know that diet and exercise are the two most unpopular words. And but however, those of us struggling with lymphedema, when it comes to exercise, we have to remember that the heart pump is what moves blood. But it's muscle contraction and gravity and manual lymph drainage that moves lymph. And this is what we need to understand. It's not going to move by itself. We have to be involved in that process.
Correct. And even in the cardiovascular reality, the majority of the pumping circulatory action, the amount of energy that actually controls our blood pressure and the motion of blood through the body, is controlled by arterial tension and muscle tension or muscle contraction. But with the lymphatic system, it's extremely important to understand these facts.
You know, something that I learned from you has been very helpful. And I see people just beating themselves up with exercise thinking they're going to get healthier. Maybe you should explain why an overabundance of exercise can actually be harmful.
As with anything, even something like water, an overabundance of hydration is not healthy. Some people go off the deep end, overhydrate, and suffer health consequences as a result. With exercise, the same phenomenon is noted. You can actually increase the stress byproducts, physiologic byproducts such as free radicals, to an unnecessary and dangerous level by excessive exercise. You can also, as anyone should know in this day and age, clearly overstress tissues which are not accustomed to exercise. Exercise is essential, it is important. If you don't use it, I do believe you will lose it. But discretion and sanity is the thing, you want to be operating from, the position you want to be operating from. You want to do exercise that is consistent but not excessively stressful to the body, because it will accelerate aging and it will accelerate body damage and long-term dysfunction, joint wear and tear, all these things. A balance of propriety is what is important.
Okay, and I think that so often when people do that, they think this is what's going to get them healthier, when in fact they're just, you just see them going downhill. And so I wish we would hear more about it. These people would hear more about it, that this is not the path to optimal health.
Again, it's a lifelong pursuit. Many times people, in attempting to correct courses that are lifelong in their tendencies or practices, overcorrect and do so with exceeding rapidity. And so, again, the body is used to certain customs, certain usages, if we want to use those terms, but the simple fact is, whatever we do, we should approach it gradually. We should allow the body to accommodate. We don't want to overstress the body, but exercise should be a part of life. All the great people who've stood for sane exercising, like Jack LaLanne, an immortal character, he's passed on, but what a talent in terms of manifesting the results, the positive results of good diet, good sane exercising, and the consistent application of those practices through a lifetime. Look at the feats of strength the man was able to do. These were not accomplished by insane programs that were undertaken in a month or some crazy thing like that. It wasn't accomplished by spending a lot of money. It was done by consistent practice within the parameters of sane principles.
Dr. Dent, I think I have learned from treating patients that is extremely helpful if you understand that whether or not they have allergies, or whether they know they have allergies. Because what I found is that I could treat a person for an entire month, and if they were eating the wrong foods on the last day, they were going to have swelling. And that's what prompted me to become a nutritionist. It's like, oh my, there's something going on here that could easily be corrected. And so I think it's particularly true that any lymphedema therapist, as well as a lymphedema patient, needs to understand what are the foods that are causing the inflammation, what are the foods that are causing the swelling. And we're finding all of a sudden, now that we hear all of this publicity about gluten, is that yes, it's affecting a lymphedema patient and adversely affecting. And so if you have a lymphedema patient that has allergies, they're eating the foods that they're allergic to, how are you ever going to get a positive outcome? You're not. You can do manual lymph drainage day after day after day, but nothing's going to change. Not if they're not eating correctly.
That's absolutely correct. And if they're not exercising properly.
This is true.
And if they're not properly hydrated.
This is true.
All of these things, it's like a triangle of health.
And it gets back to what you say. There's a lot more to lymphedema than just a swollen limb. And this is what it's so important, and it was why it was so important that you joined me in my practice, because until a patient really understands that, we're not going to make progress. We're not going to get them to the point where they want to be.
You will certainly make some measured progress, but the more completely the issue is properly addressed,
Yes.
the essential factors of proper management are utilized and incorporated and appreciated consistently, you will see huge improvement. You will see improvement proportionate to the amount of compliance to those principles.
Well, and it's pretty safe to say, I think we've kind of well touched on it, but it's pretty obvious when someone comes in as a lymphedema patient, all too often it is secondary to cancer. And cancer is the end result of a chronic inflammation, or an inflammation in the gut, or an unhealthy gut, which is true of all of the autoimmune diseases. And so that's why the very first thing I ever ask one of my patients before I start is, well, so how is your digestion? And we go from there. So, in fact, I've been to 3 conferences lately, and the main topic of all of those conferences was all about the health, the integrity of the gut. And now the microbiome is the big word now. And because we're finally identifying the fact that a toxic gastrointestinal tract is nearly the cause of every major chronic disease, including cancer, as well as the source of the inflammation that's raging through our bodies. So perhaps, Dr. Dan, it would be helpful if you can explain, because I think we're just totally unaware of what's going on in that part of our body. And now all of a sudden we're hearing about probiotics and prebiotics and dysbiosis, and what do all these things mean, and how could that possibly happen to me? Well, I think it's probably happening to 99% of the population, and we need to understand it. I think that's what's so important.
In general, I think the first place that lymphedema strikes, or dysfunction of lymphatic function, is within the intestinal tract. The very sophisticated and tiny channels upon which the proper digestion of food and its assimilation depend become compromised. The largest surface area of the body exposed to the greatest array of potentially allergenic or inflammatory substances is the gastrointestinal tract. Virtually everything we eat has the potential of killing us. If you were to take, for example, something as simple as an egg protein, injected into the bloodstream a couple of times, the results could be catastrophic.
Okay, now you're just getting close to another really popular subject, and that's leaky gut syndrome. And that was really helpful for me to understand how that happens. Why is it that the foods we enjoy the most and we eat the most frequently, we end up becoming allergic to? So can you explain how that happens?
Yeah, I don't know whether I like leaky gut syndrome as a highly accurate description of what's actually going on, but it serves the purpose. The simple fact of the matter is, when you have impaired tissue function at the cellular level, and this starts with impaired hydration of the cells and impaired alterations or impairment of ideal electrolyte levels and protein levels. When these things combine, you destroy the ability of these systems to properly do their job. The system of that GI tract is to break down allergenic foreign proteins and other foods so that they will not damage the body as their components are transferred or transported across these barrier tissues, ultimately to be distributed throughout the body. See, if that barrier is damaged, or in other words, a leaky gut syndrome occurs, you potentiate the capacity for chronic allergic sensitization to virtually every food that you are exposed to. And so it is absolutely critical to maintain healthy GI tract physiology and structure.
Okay, and along that same line, we're hearing now finally about probiotics, prebiotics,
Sure.
and why are they so important. And I think there's quite a bit of confusion there too. Well, what's the difference between a pre and a pro? And that might be helpful for their
Sure.
understanding.
Probiotics are generally substances that are bacterial. These are components that inhabit in the world of the microbiome, the microscopic organisms that inhabit the GI tract in various ways and in various stages. Certain microorganisms prefer certain areas of the GI tract, largely because of acid levels or lack of acidity. Different things. It's all a very dynamic scenario, completely and absolutely critical and vital to the health of the body, not just the GI tract, because the health of the GI tract, in my estimation, controls the manifestation of health systemically through the entire organism. Death or disease can certainly start initially with destruction of these things. The microbiome is a center of living organisms. It is a community that actually facilitates our health in ways we have very, very poorly understood until the current time, and the information on that is exploding. Destroying those organisms with antibiotics, which indeed may be clinically applicable and life-saving. We have to start paying attention to the appropriate and responsible use of these powerful drugs because of the ramifications, disastrous effects they have on the normal bacteria that contributes so much to our health and welfare, and allowing that destruction so we then lead to breakdown, insult, inflammation, damage, breakdown of the barrier and filtering structures of the intestinal tract, translating to impaired health, because the ramifications are endless.
Okay, but so now you're talking about probiotics, but I think there's a lot of confusion about prebiotics. We gotta feed the good guys, right?
Prebiotics, again, essential for the environment, and the prebiotics are largely substances that are found in the diets, and they can be trisaccharides, they can be fibers, soluble and insoluble. All these things together put together an environment that allows the appropriate organisms to flourish and to maintain and preserve our health. These organisms are under appropriate circumstances, of course, first exposed, or we are first inoculated with these things in the act of birth and breastfeeding. And these basic inoculations are set to serve us our whole life long until we destroy them, either carelessly or through some method that's designed to help cure a disease, like with heavy antibiotic use in some cases. Again, we need to pay attention to restoring those things, but appropriate diet that establishes the correct environment, this is the key. So proper fiber, proper nutrients, proper carotenoids, and staying away from chemically processed foods. Sugars, again, rear their heads. These things favor the growth and overpopulation of opportunistic saprophytic organisms, fungi, yeast, even mold. We don't want this going on. These are suppressed in normal circumstances, but when we tilt the balance in their favor, nature dictates, and their genetic machinery and personalities, if you will manifest themselves. They are there to do a job, and if they perceive that that job is being invited, so to speak, they will move in and actively participate.
Well, and you talk about some of the things that upset that balance, and I know in the past you have lectured extensively on hydration and the value of filtered water. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be helpful, because I know that has been an integral part of the change my change in my lifestyle. I've become aware. I never drank water. I didn't grow up drinking water. I lived on soda pop. Well, we know how that turned out.
That can be a pricey indulgence.
Yes, but would you talk a little bit about water filtration and how that is helpful?
I'm a believer in endpoint filtration, and I am not out to condemn the municipalities who are charged with the duty of providing safe water to a large and diverse population under varying circumstances. This is absolutely critical. The last thing we need is a problem involving some sort of bacterial epidemic due to a contaminated water supply. So using the most efficient and non-toxic methods possible, we need to ensure the water quality. But once the battle is fought, the organisms are killed or suppressed, why would we want to ingest the byproducts of that battle? This is a very difficult proposition for the municipality to address effectively or efficiently. But using a quality point of service or point of consumption filtration can remove most of that. If there's chlorine in the water, it's done its job. I don't see any real reason to drink it. Why not remove it at the tap? I am in favor of particulate and chemical, scavenging filtration that helps to enhance the quality of the water at the point it's used. And in addition to that, you of course can add different conditioning technologies based on what you want to do. There are different things that actually improve the hydration quality of water, will improve the taste of the water, will improve its capacity to hydrate tissue. It's very interesting how that works, but they're available. But the fact of the matter is, drinking water in appropriate amounts is critical to the function and structure of the entire body.
Well, I've discovered too that the older I get, the more important that is, and the hydration is critical. And I've got to say, like I told you, I grew up on soda pop, but now, thanks to you, I better understand it, and I'm trying my best to get 60 ounces of filtered water every day. So there's a number. I mean, I've tried hard since my breast cancer diagnosis to make common sense lifestyle changes. And of course, the counseling that I've had from you and what I've learned as a nutritionist have been extremely helpful. And so the other thing, though, that I didn't quite understand until fairly late in life, and that was the value of sleep. And obviously, I had another learning curve that was necessary for me to learn because I didn't get enough sleep. I've subjected myself to unusual stress, and it didn't take long before I had to deal with cancer surgery, just when I thought I had it all figured out. And but again, I think I have conquered that through diet and lifestyle changes and the right kind of water. But I think it's important to understand that I think we overlook, and I watch the younger generation too, who think they don't need any sleep. And I, from my own personal experience, say that can be a disaster because
sleep is a fundamental component of health. The very function and regulation of the body, similar to the regulation of the tides under the influence of various celestial bodies, the moon, the sun, the positioning relative to the earth. If we did not have that tidal ebb and flow, this planet would die. And it's very similar with the circadian rhythm of sleep. The whole endocrine system is geared, and this is not an act of will, this is part of our nature. It is geared to control the very balance and function of our glandular systems, our endocrine systems, our ability to deal with stress. And denying these things, is tantamount to a slow suicide and is either the evidence of a complete ignorance or an absolute irresponsibility. Sleep is critical to health, and we can see the ramifications of the general transgression of the law of sleep, if you will, throughout this culture. They're compensating for it constantly. They're continually seeking out stimulants. This is due to the fact that they are not properly sleeping. Their circadian rhythms, their stress response systems are not properly geared up and functioning.
Well, right, and I get it. I mean, I got it the hard way, a second cancer diagnosis. But I know I'm not alone of those people who can't, or I didn't make the connection to stress, or system failure, and ultimately disease. So I found I have a better understanding of the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. That was helpful, so that I could better understand when my body is just taking care of me all its own, or whether I'm overriding it with my sympathetic system. So that was a good lesson to learn, and to try to control that and to get that in balance. So could you explain when I talk about sympathetic and parasympathetic what I'm referring to?
These are the chief divisions of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is a controlling regulatory system that basically is in charge of governing the functions of the body that we are not consciously aware of, nor do we consciously control. And this is the vast majority of functionality that the body is concerned with. We control very little of the body's functions. It's the most amazing thing. If we even began to appreciate the ramifications of the autonomic nervous system and how important, and again to go back, how critically dependent on proper sleep patterns that system is. Again, that is the fulcrum. You want proper nutrition, you want proper exercise during the waking hours, proper activity, but you must have proper sleep or the system falls apart. Just like a tripod's going to fail if you remove one leg.
Okay, I get that now, and I think, Dr. Dent, you know, in retrospect and what I've learned, I have learned so much, and you know, one more time I've gotten through my most recent challenge of stomach cancer after 4.5 years of stress and sleepless nights. So my recent tests have come back clear, and I'm looking forward to my 80th birthday. But at least this time there's no lymphedema. Thank you, Dr. Dent, for addressing many of the questions facing lymphedema patients today, especially for those whose lymphedema is the aftermath of cancer surgery. It has been a thrill for me to share an office with you. I have learned so much, and I appreciate your willingness to share your expertise with me and those viewing this presentation.
Well, thank you very much for the privilege of being able to share it with you and for the opportunity of assisting you in your video.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been great having you here.
Welcome.
Okay.